Welcome to the Sci-Fi Evolution channel. The distress call rang out simultaneously in 19 star systems, its scarlet pulse cutting through the void like a cosmic scream. Within a few hours, representatives of 37 different species abandoned their activities, including trade negotiations, territorial disputes, and even heated debates about the ethics of resource extraction in the Onyx Nebula, and hurriedly headed for the Galactic Alliance main station. Something was very, very wrong. Admiral Corvus, commander of the Dominion fleet, arrived first, his massive dreadnought casting shadows across the docking bays. It was followed by the crystalline ships of the light-bearing community, buzzing with barely contained energy. The warships of the Nagian Empire, their hulls scarred from thousands of battles, followed. Even the Void Guardians, known for their closeness, had sent a representative, indicating that the emergency meeting was serious enough to lure them out of their hiding places. "It should be worth it," Commander Zard grumbled as he strode through the corridors of the station. His four arms were waving wildly. "I was in the midst of conquering the perfect, delightful system when your panic alarm interrupted my day." The council hall was full of nervous energy. The delegates whispered in dozens of languages, their voices creating a cacophony of alarm that reverberated off the crystalline walls. The usual jokes, coffee complaints, seating disputes, and idle threats of destruction were noticeably absent. Supreme Counselor Zara, calling for order with 3 sharp swings of her ceremonial staff, achieved silence in the hall, except for the occasional nervous clicking of mandibles or the rustle of wings. "Kindred," she began, her voice carrying the weight of centuries, "we are faced with an unprecedented situation. A new species has applied for galactic membership." A collective sigh swept through the hall. This was not unusual. New species applied for membership every few cycles. Most were rejected. However, Xara insisted, despite the fact that such requests were usually rejected due to primitiveness, aggressiveness, or excessive love of reality TV. This particular species exhibits disturbing characteristics. She pointed to a massive holographic display in the center of the room. "I present to you the people from the 3rd planet of the secondary star system. They call themselves Sol." The display came to life, showing a blue-green world shrouded in white clouds. He looked peaceful, even charmingly rustic. Several delegates relaxed slightly, grinning. The ambassador of the forces, his scales shimmered with amusement. "What's the problem? Do they have nuclear weapons or biological warfare capabilities? It's probably nothing worse than what we've seen before." Dr. Zinn, the Dominion's chief xenobiologist, stood up and activated his neural interface. The data began to stream across the display in a waterfall of cold, hard numbers. "The problem," he said, "is that they may be more advanced than we think." The first statistics showed the rate of species extinction over the past 5 centuries. Dr. Zinn continued, "Humans have caused the extinction of approximately 1,000 species on their home planet, not through space disasters or natural selection, but through habitat destruction, overhunting, and what they call industrial development." Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. The number was high, but not unprecedented. They also destroyed more than 90% of their planet's megafauna, which survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, and volcanic winters. Will they be able to outlive humanity? The concern grew, but the ambassador of the forces remained skeptical. Many species undergo ecological adjustments during their evolution. They've probably learned to be more careful. Dr. Zinn's optical sensors focused on the force with something akin to pity. They've accelerated. In the last century alone, their rate of extinction has increased 100-fold. They're proud to call it the 6th mass extinction. The word pride echoed through the hall like a shockwave. The delegates began to whisper among themselves, their voices rising in tone and urgency. "But this is just a consequence of poor environmental management," Counselor Vex from the Crystal community objected. "Surely they can't harm their own kind." The display changed. New numbers appeared, each of which was more alarming than the previous one in their recorded history. Dr. Zinn announced. People fought 92% of the time, not just border skirmishes or territorial disputes, but active, organized wars. The murmuring stopped, and silence reigned in the hall. They have developed over 14,000 different methods of killing each other. They have wars dedicated to specific types of weapons. Shooting wars, sword wars, gunpowder wars. They had a war called the 100 Years' War, which actually lasted 116 years. They had so much fun that they couldn't stop laughing. Some delegates laughed nervously, the kind of laughter that happens when the mind cannot comprehend what it hears. The doctor continued by saying that they had mastered the art of destruction so well that they had run out of new ways to do it effectively. So now they were focusing on creativity. They have competitions for this. They call them military innovations, and they reward the most inventive methods of destruction. Commander Zard fell silent, his arms tightly crossed over his chest. Like someone who had spent his entire career in wars, he recognized the skill when he heard it. Admiral Corvus asked, his voice barely audible, "How many are there?" The current estimate is about 8 billion. The figure hung in the air like a gloomy prediction. 8 billion of these creatures, all on one planet, are all supposedly alive, despite their apparent tendency to self-destruct. It's impossible. The Xenospecies Council, known for its violent nature, could not have maintained such a high population density. They should have self-destructed thousands of years ago. Dr. Zinn's optical sensors dimmed slightly, a grimace in electronic form. This was also our initial assessment, so we delved into their historical records. New data flooded onto the display. The numbers of victims, the characteristics of the weapons, tactical analyses that read like horror stories. In one conflict, which they called World War II, they killed more than 70 million of their kind in just 6 years. The weapons they used were so destructive that they still face environmental damage. And do you know what they did after that? The audience waited, afraid of the answer. They built even bigger ones. They have created a weapon capable of destroying their entire species multiple times. Then they built enough to do it several thousand times. More precisely, the delegates did not just feel uncomfortable, they were in a state of panic. Several of them began to retreat towards the exits, their voices trembling with fear. Ambassador Tully was visibly shaken. She had never used such extreme measures before, and Dr. Zinn's gaze was fixed on her with what could only be described as robotic compassion. They used these measures against civilian settlements twice, and the reason they stopped was not for moral awakening, but because they ran out of goals worth the cost. The room exploded with shouts from the delegates, some calling for an immediate quarantine of the Sol system, while others suggested simply pretending they had never received an application. Ambassador Greggs was updating the evacuation protocols of his kind in the midst of the chaos on his personal communicator. No one noticed the small figure sitting quietly at the back of the room. She remained silent throughout the meeting. The presentation didn't even take her eyes off the tablet she'd been working on since the beginning of the session. Her appearance was unremarkable. Average height and brown hair tied in a simple ponytail. She was dressed in an ordinary gray suit, which hinted more at the middle management level than galactic diplomacy. In fact, she looked exactly like the person who was expected to fill out quarterly sales reports on industrial lubricants, rather than representing a species that seemed to have turned extinction into an art form. While the Galactic Alliance was in a state of panic, and Dr. Zinn continued his list of human atrocities, she remained focused on her tablet, occasionally pausing to smile at something on the screen. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the kind of smile that accountants have when they find a particularly interesting discrepancy in someone else's records. When the screams reached a climax and several delegates began demanding immediate military action, she finally raised her head. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft and almost casual. It shouldn't have escalated into a full-scale panic, but somehow it did. There was such a sudden silence in the room that the lack of sound was almost deafening. Each optical sensor, faceted eye, and traditional eye turned to a small human woman sitting in the far corner. She smiled the same accounting smile and stood up. "I believe there may be some inaccuracies in your presentation, Dr. Zinn." The sensors focused on her. "Our research team spent months collecting this data. Each statistic has been verified from multiple sources." "Indeed, I'm sure it was," she said, moving slowly to the front of the room. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. Each one of them seemed to carry more power than her petite figure allowed. "It is thoroughly well-researched but incomplete," she said. She walked over to the display console and plugged in her tablet with practiced ease. "My name is Dr. Rachel May, and I come from Terra. As a delegate to this meeting, I must say that I am genuinely impressed by your ability to gather information. You've managed to uncover some truly fascinating details about my species." The display changed, showing the contents of her tablet, a series of rows of data much more detailed than anything Dr. Zinn presented. "However, you missed a few things." Her smile widened. "Actually, you missed quite a lot. Those soft, rhythmic pulses filling the room didn't come from the Council's security systems. They were coming from something completely different, something that made Dr. Rachel May check her tablet with a pleased expression on the face of someone whose dinner reservation had just been confirmed. "Oh, good," she said, glancing at the screen. "Right on time." The confusion was interrupted by the voice of Supreme Advisor Zara. "Dr. May, what exactly is going on with our monitoring systems?" "Nothing is going on with them," Rachel replied, standing up and straightening her suit. The display came to life, showing not the surface of Terra, but a star map unlike any they had ever seen. The systems were labeled with human names, trade routes were drawn with neat blue lines, and resource extraction points were marked with efficient green dots. The truth is that we were growing up. For quite a long time, about 60 standard years to be exact. We preferred not to announce ourselves until we were ready. The scales of the Force Ambassador turned a sickly yellow hue, and their deep space monitoring stations began to fail. We decided to develop something more subtle. Rachel, our space exploration expert, has infiltrated and developed a new technology called a whisper drive. This technology does not generate large energy signatures that your sensors can detect. Instead, it works by convincing the space-time continuum that our ships are always where they belong. It's philosophically intriguing, virtually invisible, and has the added advantage of being undetectable to your sensors. Commander Zarg was feverishly working at his console, comparing Rachel's map positions with his fleet's sensor data. His expression grew more worried with each comparison. "These coordinates," he muttered. "We examined these systems, and they were empty." Rachel asked innocently, "Or did you just see what you expected to see?" Empty systems are much easier to catalog than busy ones, requiring less paperwork. The consequences of this revelation were like a physical blow across the room. If humans were operating in the explored space unnoticed, then every assumption of galactic security was flawed, every defensive strategy was compromised, and every carefully maintained balance of power was based on false information. Dr. Zinn's optical sensors switched between different spectra, as if changing his visual range could reveal something new. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Most galactic civilizations consider themselves powerful if they control a dozen systems. The Dominion, the largest single political entity in the known space, claims sovereignty over 23 systems, but these are only developed territories. We have research stations and surveillance posts in about 200 other systems, Rachel continued casually. Nothing permanent, just enough to keep an eye on everything and make sure no one is planning anything unfriendly. The room was so quiet that the sound of the delegates' breathing or equivalent biological processes seemed unnaturally loud. The systems under surveillance included virtually every major civilization in the galaxy, which were monitored, cataloged, and analyzed without their knowledge. "You've been spying on us," Admiral Corvus said, his voice barely under control. "Espionage is such a strong word," Rachel replied. "We prefer proactive threat assessment." "Can you really blame us? We applied for membership in your club, and the first thing you did was give a lecture about how dangerous and cruel we are. It's not exactly inviting us to join." She moved on to the next section of her presentation, and detailed files appeared on the display for each species represented in the room. Military capabilities, economic structures, political weaknesses, cultural blind spots. Information that should have taken decades to collect and analyze. "We've been following all of you for a while. The doctrine of the Dominion fleet is impressive, but predictable. The energy weapons of the Crystal community are formidable in close combat, but their effectiveness decreases with distance. The Nagian Empire presents itself as a warrior poet, but their tactical flexibility is surprisingly limited." Each observation was delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather, but the accuracy was alarming. Rachel revealed military secrets that some species didn't share even with their closest allies. "The Guardians of the Void are perhaps the most intriguing," she continued, focusing on the most introverted delegate in the room. "All this mystical hermit nonsense, but you have an impressive intelligence network. We had to work hard to avoid interfering with your activities." The representative of the Void Guards made a sound like the grinding of stone, perhaps indicating distress or grudging respect. It was difficult to distinguish. "But what really attracted us," Rachel said, "was the new display of intercepted messages. Advisor Vex's crystalline form assumed a defensive stance. You're all so busy keeping an eye on each other that you haven't noticed the real danger," Counselor Vex said. Rachel replied, "You have built a galactic civilization that is completely focused on maintaining the status quo. Everyone stays within their designated territories, adheres to their traditional roles, and carefully avoids doing anything that could upset the balance." The display presented economic data, indicators of technological progress, and population growth statistics of the main galactic civilizations. The trends were undeniable. Everything was leveling off, approaching zero growth, going into a comfortable decline. "You've created the perfect system for managing decline," Rachel remarked. "Very stable, very predictable, very safe, and completely safe. At the current rate, your large civilizations may have a lifespan of about 2,000 years before critical systems begin to fail. The Dominion may run out of readily available rare metals in about 1,500 years. The energy needs of the Crystal community are growing faster than its ability to collect stellar radiation. The Nagian Empire's warrior culture is great for expansion, but they've forgotten how to maintain the infrastructure." The delegates shifted uncomfortably, acknowledging the problems they had ignored for centuries. "People don't thrive in stagnation. We thrive in growth. Continuous, relentless, exponential growth. And we've become very good at finding new ways to support it." The display changed again, showing the consumption of Terra's resources over time, rather than the trajectory of human civilization, marked by a rapid rise followed by a period of stagnation and decline. "The human race continues to evolve. We extract resources from asteroids, not deplete our own planet. We are building homes in space, not overpopulating our surface. We are transforming marginal worlds, not fighting for the desired ones. And when we exhaust our simple options, we develop new technologies to create more complex ones." She fell silent, letting the consequences take root. Most species expand until they reach their bearing capacity, then either stabilize or collapse. People expand until they increase their load-bearing capacity, then they expand even more. It's not sustainable by your standards, but that's because your standards assume that sustainability means accepting constraints. The audience began to realize the true nature of what they were facing. It wasn't just a violent species seeking membership. It was a completely different way of existence that challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying galactic civilization. Rachel explained as she put away her tablet and prepared to return to her seat. You can keep pretending that we don't exist, in which case we will continue to grow, and you will continue to shrink until we eventually inherit the default galaxy. Or you can accept reality and figure out how to work with us. She smiled her characteristic accountant smile. Any option suits us because we are very patient and we have a great demographic. The pulsating tones became faster and more complex, and warning systems throughout the station began to detect things that had not been there before. Oh, Rachel added, as if remembering something insignificant. I probably should mention that we brought a few friends to the meeting, in case the conversation doesn't go well. The main tactical screen was suddenly plunged into chaos as proximity sensors throughout the station began to detect contacts that had not been there a few moments ago. What started as a few scattered spots quickly expanded to dozens, then hundreds, then so many individual signatures that display processing systems struggled to display them all. Admiral Corvus took a deep breath, his large hands flying over his personal command console. Nothing so large could approach unnoticed, he thought, considering that our defensive perimeter grid stretched for 12 light years in all directions. Dr. Rachel May intervened without looking up from her tablet. Very impressive coverage. We especially like the overlapping sensor arrays near the fourth moon. Great work by the engineers. She finally looked up, noting the Admiral's expression with mild curiosity. Did you think that we came here alone? The tactical display zoomed out, showing the full scope of our operations. No matter what happened at the Galactic Alliance station, the consequences were a nightmare for those in charge of galactic security. Ships appeared everywhere, not arriving or deactivating their cloaking devices, but simply materializing, as if they had always been there and reality was only now catching up. Sensory ghost, Dr. Zinn muttered, switching over every scan frequency his optical array could cover. It must be some kind of sensory ghost or electronic warfare countermeasure. Oh, they're real, Rachel assured him cheerfully. We just convinced your sensors that they were looking at empty space. It turns out that if you adjust the quantum resonant frequency of your hull skin so that it matches the signature of background radiation in the region where you are located, most detection systems classify you as natural space debris and automatically filter you out. Commander Zarg was feverishly working with his console, comparing the new data with the fleet deployment records. The number of contacts continued to grow. What started as a worrying tactical situation quickly escalated into a matter of life and death for everyone in the room. Even the most conservative estimates pointed to more than 300 enemy ships, and new ones appeared every few seconds. How many ships have you brought? Counselor Vex asked, her crystalline form shimmering from the stress patterns casting prismatic reflections on the walls of the hall. That's it, Rachel replied shortly. The room was silent except for the sound of their breathing and the hum of machinery. The insane sound of the warning systems was not a strategic move. It was a declaration of intent. You're talking about war, Admiral Corvus said quietly. I'm talking about insurance, Rachel corrected. War is what happens when diplomacy fails. This is what happens when diplomacy succeeds, but everyone must fully understand what they are agreeing to. She got up and walked over to the main display, her movements still casual, but somehow more purposeful. You see, as far as humans are concerned, we are very good at recognizing patterns, and the pattern we have observed in galactic politics is quite simple. New species apply for membership, are rejected or marginalized, and then spend the next few centuries being gradually absorbed or destroyed by the established powers. She pointed to the tactical display, where the human ships were beginning to form what looked suspiciously like a battle formation. We decided to skip this particular process by choosing a more direct approach. Advisor Zara initiated an emergency communication protocol in an attempt to contact the station's defensive forces. The response was swift and alarming. The station's defense command reported that all weapons systems were disabled. She spoke in a controlled voice, without harm. Disabled, meaning they receive commands to disconnect from an unknown source. "Oh, that would be us," Rachel said, sounding apologetic. "We had to make sure that no unpleasant incidents would happen while we were having our conversation. Your defensive grid is impressive, but it is completely inactive, making it vulnerable to anyone who understands your communication protocols." She tapped on her tablet, and a new display appeared showing the station's defensive systems. Every weapon platform, every shield generator, every point defense array was highlighted in red, inactive, useless. "How did you crack our security codes?" Dr. Zinn asked. Rachel replied, "We have been monitoring your communications for decades. Every software update, every security fix, every scheduled maintenance. We've been monitoring everything. By the time you realize that someone has been watching, they will already know everything they need to know." The consequences were significant. If people had been monitoring galactic communications for so long, then every military secret, every diplomatic negotiation, and every supposedly secure transaction would have been compromised. However, Rachel assured, "We are not here to take over your station, conquer your territories, or perform any dramatic actions. Our goal is to start a discussion about the future of galactic civilization. It's just that some discussions require a certain level of background information." The tactical display has changed again, showing not only human ships around the station, but also a wider view of the galaxy. The surrounding star system showed an increasing number of contacts, indicating the true scale of human presence. It wasn't just a fleet. It was a network of ships spread across numerous systems, all connected by communication channels that somehow evaded all the detection systems developed by the galaxy's best military minds. "This is your entire fleet," Commander Zark stated, his voice devoid of emotion but full of professional recognition. "This is our diplomatic corps," Rachel corrected. "Our fleet is much larger and is currently deployed in territories that you have not yet discovered. We believe it's always wise to have a reserve in case negotiations don't go according to plan." The casual mention of reserve broke Admiral Corvus' composure. "How big is this significantly larger fleet, Rachel?" she asked, consulting her tablet with the air of a person checking a shopping list. "Approximately 15,000 ships, give or take a few hundred, depending on your definition of operational readiness. We've been building them for quite a long time, and people are very," Rachel replied. "We create ships just as other species create furniture, when we need them and in quantities required by the situation. It's not a military force, it's a production capability." Rachel May moved on to the next part of her presentation, showing industrial production data that defied all known economic models. This is what happens when you give a species that has been perfecting military science for thousands of years access to asteroid mining, thermonuclear energy, and self-replicating production systems, she explained. "We don't build ships one at a time in carefully managed production facilities. We build them in swarms using automated factories that can reproduce themselves." Images of human shipyards appeared on the display. Huge structures in space that looked more like living organisms than traditional production facilities. Ships were not built so much as they grew. "The beauty of exponential growth," Rachel continued, "is that it starts slowly and then accelerates beyond anyone's ability to predict or control. Over the past few decades, we have been doubling our industrial capacity every few years. At the moment, we could probably replace every ship in this fleet in about 6 months if we had a reason to do so." There was complete silence in the room, except for the measured sounds of the alarm system. The delegates weren't just scared. They were experiencing a fundamental shift in their understanding of what was possible. "But here's what's really interesting," Rachel said, her tone changing to something akin to sympathy. "We don't really want to conquer anyone. Conquest is expensive, time-consuming, and generally bad for business. What we want is much simpler." She lowered her tablet and returned to her seat, but stopped halfway and turned to address the audience directly. "We want to be left alone so that we can pursue our passions, grow, build, explore, and sometimes engage in small educational battles with each other to hone our skills. We are open to trading with anyone who is interested, learning from anyone who is willing to teach, and generally going about our business, making the galaxy a more exciting place." She paused, letting the words take root. "But we also want to make sure that everyone understands that leaving us alone doesn't mean ignoring us, pretending we don't exist, or making plans for what to do with us when we're not paying attention." The tactical display showed how the human ships meticulously adjusted their positions precisely. It was not a threatening move, but it was a clear demonstration of our coordination and capabilities. "That's what's going to happen," Rachel said, her voice determined and confident. She adopted the tone of a person presenting a business proposal. "We will discuss the terms of people's participation in the Galactic Alliance, not as applicants seeking admission, but as equals, agreeing on the terms of our participation in the future." She smiled, and for the first time since the beginning of the meeting, this smile seemed sincere. "If anyone has any objections to this process," she pointed to a display showing hundreds of human ships lining up in perfect formation around the station, "I'm sure we can find a solution." The silence in the room lasted 17 seconds, long enough for each delegate to fully realize the gravity of the situation, but not long enough for anyone to formulate a response that did not sound like panic or surrender. Ambassador Gregg spoke first. "What are your conditions?" "What is it?" he asked, his scales changing different colors before settling on one. Dr. Rachel May, with a slight hint of surprise, tilted her head slightly. "Our terms, well, it's refreshing. I like that." She brought up a new document on her tablet, which looked suspiciously like it had been prepared in advance. "Human membership in the Galactic Alliance, with full voting rights and representation proportional to our territorial possessions." She began to read from an apparently prepared list. "Recognition of our current sphere of influence. These are the 47 systems that we mentioned earlier, with guarantees of non-interference in our internal affairs." Admiral Corvus was feverishly calculating the consequences. "Proportional representation would give us almost 20% of the Council's votes, more influence than any single race has ever had." "Math is math," Rachel replied with a shrug. "We control 47 systems, and we want to be represented fairly. The territory we represent, we get votes. That's how representative democracy works, isn't it?" She continued her list with the skill of someone who had done it before. "Free trade agreements with all council members. People are granted most favored nation status for resource sharing and technology transfer. Joint research initiatives on mutually beneficial projects. And perhaps most importantly, the establishment of human colonies and research stations in previously uninhabited systems without the need for prior approval from existing governments." The consequences of this last point hit the hall like a physical blow. Uninhabited was a flexible term, and everyone knew it. "You request permission to expand wherever you wish," Counselor Vex said, his crystalline form shimmering with excitement. "We're asking for recognition of what we're already doing," Rachel corrected. "The only difference is whether it happens with your cooperation or against your objections." Commander Zarg leaned forward, his professional curiosity overcoming his misgivings. Her expression didn't change, but there was something in her posture that suggested she was amused by the question. "Well, that's your decision. Democratic institutions rely on the right of independent actors to make their own choices, even if they are not the best." The tactical display has been updated. showing that the human fleet is beginning to form into a formation that is clearly not defensive in nature. The ships moved purposefully, taking up positions that would allow them to cover every major installation in the system with overlapping fields of fire. Of course, Rachel continued, a refusal would mean that the Galactic Alliance has decided to classify humanity as a hostile force rather than a potential member. Hostile forces are usually not given advance notice when we need to secure an area for our growing population. The threat was uttered in a tone that could have been used to discuss lunch, but its consequences were unequivocal. Cooperation meant treating people as equals, while uncooperation meant treating them as conquerors. This is blackmail, Dr. Zinn stated bluntly. This is real politics, Rachel replied. The powerful do what they want, and the weak suffer. We didn't invent this principle. We just began to apply it very well. She closed her tablet and walked to the center of the room, addressing the delegates directly. But here's what's intriguing. We don't want to be the powerful ones who make everyone else suffer. We want to be the ones who make everyone stronger. The display has changed again, showing not military deployments or territorial claims, but something much more complex. Trade forecasts, technology transfer, and joint development programs that will benefit every major galactic civilization. Dr. Rachel May, with a slight hint of surprise, tilted her head slightly. Our terms, well, it's refreshing. I like that. She brought up a new document on her tablet, which looked suspiciously like it had been prepared in advance. Human membership in the Galactic Alliance, with full voting rights and representation proportional to our territorial possessions. She began to read from an apparently prepared list. Recognition of our current sphere of influence. These are the 47 systems that we mentioned earlier, with guarantees of non-interference in our internal affairs. Admiral Corvus was feverishly calculating the consequences. Proportional representation would give us almost 20% of the Council's votes, more influence than any single race has ever had. Math is math, Rachel replied with a shrug. We control 47 systems, and we want to be represented fairly. The territory we represent, we get votes. That's how representative democracy works, isn't it? She continued her list with the skill of someone who had done it before. Free trade agreements with all council members. People are granted most favored nation status for resource exchange and technology transfer. Joint research initiatives on mutually beneficial projects. And perhaps most importantly, the establishment of human colonies and research stations in previously uninhabited systems without the need for prior approval from existing governments. The consequences of this last point hit the hull like a physical blow. Uninhabited was a flexible term, and everyone knew it. You request permission to expand wherever you wish, Councillor Vex said, his crystalline form shimmering with excitement. We're asking for recognition of what we're already doing, Rachel corrected. The only difference is whether it happens with your cooperation or against your objections. Commander Zarg leaned forward, his professional curiosity overcoming his misgivings. Her expression didn't change, but there was something in her posture that suggested she was amused by the question. Well, that's your decision. Democratic institutions rely on the right of independent actors to make their own choices, even if they are not the best. The tactical display has been updated, showing that the human fleet is beginning to form into a formation that is clearly not defensive in nature. The ships moved purposefully, taking up positions that would allow them to cover every major installation in the system with overlapping fields of fire. Of course, Rachel continued, a refusal would mean that the Galactic Alliance has decided to classify humanity as a hostile force rather than a potential member. Hostile forces are usually not given advance notice when we need to secure an area for our growing population. The threat was uttered in a tone that could have been used to discuss lunch, but its consequences were unequivocal. Cooperation meant treating people as equals, while uncooperation meant treating them as conquerors. This is blackmail, Dr. Zinn stated bluntly. This is real politics, Rachel replied. The powerful do what they want, and the weak suffer. We didn't invent this principle. We just began to apply it very well. She closed her tablet and walked to the center of the room, addressing the delegates directly. But here's what's intriguing. We don't want to be the powerful ones who make everyone else suffer. We want to be the ones who make everyone stronger. The display has changed again, showing not military deployments or territorial claims, but something much more complex. Trade forecasts, technology transfer, and joint development programs that will benefit every major galactic civilization. Human industrial potential could solve the problem of resource scarcity, which has hindered galactic expansion for centuries. She explained that our production methods can change the way we build everything. From spacecraft to living quarters, our research potential can contribute to technological progress in all areas. The numbers on the screen showed remarkable economic expansion, suggesting that galactic civilization was expanding at a rate considered impossible under the current system. "We're offering to share everything," Rachel said simply. "Our technologies, our resources, our industrial infrastructure, and our expertise are all available to the board members in good condition. In return, we only ask for recognition that we will not disappear, will not remain small, and will not ask for permission to exist." Supreme Advisor Zara finally found her voice. "And if we agree to these terms, what guarantee do we have that human expansion will not threaten our core territories?" "The same guarantee as with any other board member," Rachel replied, mentioning contractual obligations, mutual benefit, and the understanding that violating agreements is costly. "Usually," she paused, carefully considering her next words, "but I'd like to add something that might be more encouraging. People are builders, not destroyers. We could destroy this entire station and everyone on it before announcing our presence. We could conquer half the galaxy before you even knew we existed. The fact that we are talking here and not shooting somewhere else should tell you something about our true intentions. The truth of this statement is indisputable. Any species with the capabilities demonstrated by humans could choose violence over diplomacy. The fact that they didn't is either a good sign or a sign of predators confident in their superiority and playing with their prey. How much time do we have to decide?" Admiral Corvus asked, consulting Rachel's tablet with the air of a man checking a meeting schedule. "Well, it depends on how long it takes. It takes time to update your databases with accurate information about the current galactic demographics and territorial control. I would say it's somewhere between immediately and before someone decides to test our defensive capabilities." The hall was full of activity, and delegates began to consult with their governments, make calculations, and try to find alternatives that did not exist. The math was simple and ruthless. People had the power to take whatever they wanted, but instead offered negotiations. Refusing to negotiate meant accepting an alternative. One by one, the major powers began to confirm their agreement. Admiral Corvus, with his military background, clearly understood hopeless tactical situations. The Crystal community, following its analytical nature, came to the same conclusion through different reasoning. Even the Void Guards eventually signaled their agreement, the voices of their representatives resonating in unison. As the situation changed, we either adapted or died within 47 minutes of Rachel's presentation. The Galactic Alliance has voted unanimously to accept humanity as a member on the terms proposed. It was not the fastest decision in the history of the Council, but it was certainly the most decisive. Rachel May, making notes on her tablet, said, "Wonderful. She will instruct our diplomatic team to send official documentation in the coming days. In the meantime, our ships will depart at standard diplomatic distances to avoid possible misunderstandings." The tactical display showed how the human fleet was dispersing. The ships disappeared from the sensors as mysteriously as they appeared. In a matter of minutes, the only evidence of their presence was the residual readings of the instruments, stubbornly repeating that the impossible had just happened. Dr. May, Zara's High Counselor asked, "May I ask, why are you?" Now you could have continued to expand in secret for another decade and no one would have found out. But Rachel stopped at the entrance to the hall, considering the question. When she turned around, her expression was more serious than it had been all day. "We've learned something important from studying your civilizations," she said softly. "Isolation leads to stagnation, and stagnation leads to decline. We don't want to inherit a dead galaxy. We want to be part of a living one." She smiled one last time, but it wasn't the predatory grin she wore during the negotiations, but something warmer and more sincere. Besides, people work better when they have someone to compete with. A galaxy full of allies who can also be rivals sounds like fun. When the doors of the hall closed behind her, the delegates could only ponder their new reality. Humanity arrived not as supplicants or conquerors, but as a force of nature that simply announced its intention to change the galaxy. From their own point of view, they were presented with a solution: either develop or stay behind. The wise choice was to evolve, and news of this decision spread throughout the galaxy, carried by invisible ships. The negotiations were completed, and the galaxy had a new leadership, whether it realized it or not. In the depths of space, automated factories have begun to produce the next generation of ships for a species that was just beginning. The era of human expansion has officially begun.